Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, and each episode I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another and bring them on to share some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I am so excited for today's guest. I have Ty Cook on with me. Ty, can I tell everybody who you are?
Yes. So I am a seventh grade science teacher. I've taught seventh grade science. This is now going to be my 6th year. And I originally set out to be a high school social studies teacher, which is so interesting how that path unfolded and is totally different. But I feel like I've definitely found my place and my calling. And I share on social media all about my classroom and on my podcast. And I'm excited to be here and to tell my story with you.
Well, I have been looking forward to this talk, so we'll just dive right in. With every guest that I have, I always love to start at the very beginning, and that is when you were a kid, what did you dream you were going to be? Like, was educator even on that list?
It was. The interesting thing for me, like so many, I feel like I wanted to be a marine biologist and a zoologist. I feel like that's a big, group of people that want to do that. And what I knew is I loved animals. And so the interesting thing to me, I always looked up to and respected principals and my teachers. And I thought, wow, I would love to be that. And I think that my path got diverted because I never really was 100% about anything. And that's what I always tell people out there, my students. It's okay if you change your path, and it can change whenever you want it to and multiple times. I wish I had gone straight into education, but then on the flip side, I think about all the experiences I had in business, working for my parents for a few years, that kind of give me a little bit of a perspective into what students face when they go out into the real world and dealing in business. So it's interesting. I did always want to be a teacher, but it took me a while to actually realize that was the path that I needed to go on. And it took something in an office for 4 or 5 years. I was like, I know this is not for me. I know that I want to do something different. And how do I actually make that happen?
I find that is the case with more and more teachers that I talk to. There's always that group that knew they were going to be a teacher, like there was no question in their mind from like the day that they were 3 years old playing with their stuffed animals. Then there's so many others who are like, I knew I had that passion, but it didn't actually make sense to me until later, and then it did, and I knew that that's exactly what I was meant to be doing. And so when you decided to actually go and pursue education, was it always secondary that was in your mindset?
It was always secondary, yes. I actually wanted to teach high school AP US history. That was the focus, the goal. So when I went back to get my master's in secondary education, I did a concentration in history. So I took a lot of history courses, and I added, I guess, like a minor in history as I was doing my master's. So that was the goal. And I think when I look back on it now, the reason why that was my goal is my social studies teacher. She looped up with us 4 years in high school. I had her the whole time. And, you look at those teachers, and I thought, okay, it's social studies. It's this thing. But the reality was, as much as I love social studies, it was more about her and less about social studies. Because I think back now that I'm a middle school science teacher, I loved science in middle school because I had amazing teachers. When I got to high school, I lost that love of science because I didn't really have those great teachers that made me still love it. And I started to hate science because it was hard. I didn't understand. I wasn't interested. I wasn't engaged. And it's so interesting because now I look at it and I'm like, I do love social studies and it's super important, but I think what I really loved most was my teacher who made it that connection for me. And I think that that's kind of what you realize is, now, as a middle school science teacher, I can't even see myself teaching high school, let alone social studies. So it's interesting how our paths unfold. And I always tell people, you've got to be willing to listen because you can be surprised about what you think in your head is your path and how it will change.
Yeah, and that's great advice. And it's so interesting to me that you said your high school history teacher looped all 4 years. That is not heard of very often. But I can imagine, at that age of a kid, being able to have somebody in your life throughout the whole high school experience has to be incredibly memorable. And I can see why you thinking like this is what I want to teach, because that person was so ingrained and invested in your life. And that's, but I love just your honesty of like you wanted to be like a marine biologist or some kind of other zoologist, and you're like, but I didn't want to teach science. And so it's so funny that that's what you end up doing now. But through social media, it's clearly evident your love for that subject and for the age that you're working with, which middle school, that's a very special group of kids. It's a group of kids that I love for like an hour or two, but all day, I think there's those of us that are meant for elementary, those of us that are meant for high school, and definitely those of us that are meant for middle. What do you love most about working with middle school students?
They're so weird. Like middle school is so weird. And every time I tell people I teach middle school, Maddie Fairchild is in the comments, she teaches middle school, we all get the same reactions. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. Or, oh, I had the worst middle school experience. And every time I get that reaction, what I realize is how important it is that we are there for kids when they're going through those awkward years, the weird years, when they're not feeling confident, when they're not feeling good enough, all of those things that we felt or that people tell me about their middle school experience and why they remember it so badly. Yeah. That's why it's so important, because the thing I love about middle schoolers is we're at that age and a lot of people are like, oh, they're going through all the hormones and the attitudes. But middle schoolers in reality, although they are growing up, they love to learn. They love to get excited about stuff. And as a middle school teacher, what I found, because I did do high school for a year before middle school, long-term subbing, when I go into a middle school classroom, I can tell them whatever, and they're excited if I'm excited. And that's the really important thing, is that we as teachers can create that excitement, but they actually feed off our energy. And middle schoolers are still excited to learn. They are still little kids, even if they put on this facade of they're growing up, and they like, I don't know, they like to have fun. So to me, we can be weird together. We can, build their confidence and their self-esteem and all of those things. But that's the best part to me.
Well, it's so funny. Unexpectedly, I've had like 5 or 6 middle school educators on in the last month or so, and they all have said exactly what you said about middle school kids. People have this opinion of them. They said, but they are struggling with these emotions and these hormones and things like that. But they're still such little kids inside that they still, you get both sides of things with them, and that's what makes it so much fun. Well, Ty, you also at some point in your career decide to start feeling comfortable enough sharing out some of what you do on social media. What did that process to going on social media feel like? Like, was it pretty natural? Like, hey, I'm just going to share some stuff, or was it something you really had to work yourself up to?
So I have always been on social media personally, and I didn't really realize there was even a teacher community out there. I didn't follow teachers on Instagram. I didn't know that teachers did that. Like, the whole concept to me was foreign. A lot of people say, I followed certain teachers like Hope and Wade before I ever made my teacher Instagram. That wasn't the case for me. And it wasn't until the teacher across the hall was like, this community's out there. We need to join it. We need to create an Instagram. And she inspired me to do that. And overnight, I just started sharing. And the interesting thing is I did that on my personal pages, and I also did photography on the side. So I love photos. I've always loved social media, being able to put out images and caption them and to share. And on my photography page, I did live streams. I did these types of things. And so it was interesting because all these things I was doing before, I started doing on my teacher page. So for me, it was like a natural transition into this. So I never thought it was strange to story. I never thought it was weird to go live like on a Sunday night just to interview people and talk. But I know for a lot of teachers that is not super comfortable to them, and I get it. I definitely think it can be a generational thing where millennials were comfortable. We've been sharing on the internet since MySpace, and I was there when Facebook started in 2005. Like, and even further back. So it's just interesting. Like, I think it's just ingrained in us. We share our lives. And I think when we share our lives, we find out that we have a lot more in common with people everywhere. And you kind of get this collective community saying like, oh yeah, I've experienced that too. And I think that's really important in education.
Well, I've got a really serious question then to follow that up with, and that is, you're pretty popular on social media. So how do you handle knowing that some of your class pets are equally or more popular than you?
They're definitely more popular than me, and that's fine. I mean, I think they're cuter than I am, and people.
But I gotta say, I have to ask that only because your stories and what you share are great, and I listen to them. But anytime you bring one of your animals and the story that you have to share about something they're going through or something that you did in the class, I'm like, those are always my favorites. And then when you don't share them for like a week or two, I'm like, where are the pets? Like, I want to see more of the pets.
I was just about to story them this morning, and I thought, okay, I need to do it after this interview. I'm telling you, I have two camps of people, though, and this is what people don't realize. When you share, you realize what people like and what people don't like. And I have a group of people who are invested in the pets. They'll send me messages and say, my kids wanted to see the pets today, and they're not there. And then I have a whole nother group of people, and I'm not going to name who they are. It's totally fine, that if my pets pop up in the stories, whoosh, like they're like, we don't care. And I get it. There's people that aren't really into pets. They don't get it. They think it's weird. And you know what? I mean, I'm fine with being perceived as weird. So there's two camps, and I'm always like trying to please everybody. And I forget that there's some people that want to see the pets. And I have kids and teachers that their kids follow me just to see the pets. So I try to do both. But then sometimes I'm like, am I just like bombarding these people with pet stories? But
well, from my own personal opinion, I will say, please keep sharing the pets because I love seeing the pets. And many times, I mean, you're not even ever in the shot. It's like you just zoomed in on them and then you're talking about them. And I love that so much. And I'm so glad that Maddie Fairchild, who's listening, said she's team pets as well. So that makes me love Maddie even more than I already did. But, I want to kind of switch gears with that, though. And anybody that has been on social media for any amount of time knows that there's always that battle with self-doubt and with comparison and things like that. You have a fairly large following, so I can see, and you're connected with a lot of incredible educators. So how do you personally keep doubt at bay where it doesn't begin to take root and then control the way you feel about you or your work?
Yeah, the interesting thing is I interview people on my podcast, and every time I interview them, there's two things that happen. You can look at everybody out there. They have all of these followers, 2, 3, 4 times more than you. They have this book that they created. I interviewed Cassie Stevens, and she's so inspiring. She's doing so many things. She's got multiple books that you can buy on Amazon. She has a conference that she created. She's a presenter. She's going live. Good Morning America featured her. And you can look at that and say, wow, like I thought I was doing a lot of stuff, but I'm not compared to her. But the thing is, I look at these teachers and I think, wow, like these are people that can inspire us to do more, or we don't have to. We get to be our own version of us. And I think it's really important to stop and say, I'm just super proud of her doing what she's doing. She's put in the work. She's the one that's done all of these things. And be proud of other people. You don't have to compare yourself to them. And the other thing, when I started on social media, Mr. D was like, and he still is, the huge funny guy. And I'm like, I feel like I can be comedic, but I'm not a comedian. And he is a comedian and he's amazing. And so you have to like stop and say, they can be them and I can be me. And that's what we do in our classroom. And when you play that comparison game, like, well, the teacher next door does this. Well, every teacher is totally different. I don't expect that every teacher does escape rooms. And, I'm not great at labs like some other science teachers are. I don't have the same science background, but my students love my escape rooms, and they might get labs from another teacher, or they may get a teacher that loves books. But you have to present yourself. And if you get into the game of, I'm going to try to present other people, well, it's never going to be you. You have to authentically do what is you. And that's what your students will connect to.
Well, and I think that is such good advice for people to hear because, you have to understand who you are and the strengths you bring and rest in that. and not look at it as, well, they're doing better things than I am. No, you do something great, own what you do, and then celebrate other people and what they do great, and be happy for them, but know that you're doing good stuff too. So I love that. Well, Ty, you also have taken moments here and there on social media to just be really honest and real. And that's one thing I really appreciate about your account, is it's not all, just here's great ideas, here's great activity, here's my pets, here's this and that. You have flashes of, let me share with you something that I'm struggling. Or, when COVID went down and you said, today's just a really hard day of me missing my kids and missing my classroom. But you also expressed and shared something on social media recently about just some health things that you were going through as well, and kind of one of the reasons why you were in Florida and things like that. So why do you feel like, or how did you get to the point where you were comfortable enough like sharing that side of yourself as well?
Well, I think that, we don't want to put out a false picture of our lives. And sometimes you don't even realize what people perceive. When I'm down in Florida, I knew why I was down in Florida. I have an immune system disorder. That was the safest place for me to be. That's where Joseph wanted me to be. I thought about coming home multiple times, and Chattanooga was hard hit in this. We are now, if you look at the New York Times since reopening, we were in an article. We're in the top 5 hotspot cities that are back on the rise. And it's scary. Like, I have an immune system disorder. I go to an allergy doctor, and I've always had chest infections, pneumonia every year since I was a little kid, sinus infections. My grandfather's had them. My mom's had them. And so I started going to see an allergy doctor and taking allergy shots. I take every medicine known to man to prevent them, and none of it was preventing it. So after they did blood tests last year, they realized that my body cannot remember those strains of pneumonia and chest infections. Wow. So in a classroom, we got kids coughing every day. COVID is the new thing, but y'all, I've been worried about this stuff all along because I know I get them. And so I have to take treatments that basically help me get the missing part of my immune system. And so this is a genetic disorder called CVID. 2% of Americans have it, but most people go untreated, not identified. So I feel really lucky that it's something that's treatable and manageable. But when you hear people saying in the news that we don't know how this affects people with immune system disorders, pre-existing conditions, in my mind, I'm like, I need to be where there's less cases because it's scary, it's uncertain, it's unknown. But I know on social media when I was down in the Keys, yes, I'm in paradise. It was absolutely amazing. But I think it's important to share people the full story, because what they're not seeing is the reason why I'm down there. And I wanted to share my immune system disorder before, but it's always like, you just have to find the right time for you. And, it had never felt like the right time. But I've shared in my personal life with people at my school. They knew I had it. My friends know. And sometimes you forget what you've shared where and what people know and what they don't know. And, I just felt like people needed to know, like, yeah, I am down in the Keys, but I do want y'all to keep in mind the reason why I'm down here is actually a really important reason. And there's other people out there that I know are battling with this. So when you go out in public without your mask because you're not worried, what you're not realizing is there's people that have had cancer, who have immune system disorders, who are worried. And we've all got to be collectively thinking about what are the steps we can take to do things for the greater good. And what does that look like? And so that's why I shared, because I think it's important, because people just don't, I guess if you don't have those issues, like, you're not thinking about what those people are facing.
Well, and I love to what you just shared there about, we can see pictures and we can see things online and think we know the story behind, but taking time to get to know like why they're doing that. And you don't always know the reasons, because it's like you said, sometimes you're like, either A, I don't remember if I've told people this publicly or not. And then B, it's like, how do I bring this up where it doesn't look like woe is me, or it's right. Awkward, or like, and so I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability in that, because that was really powerful to me every time I see people, especially with the platform, sharing pieces of themselves that aren't always super positive or comfortable or anything like that. So, and switching gears a little bit as we begin to wrap this up, I've got 2 more questions. And one of them is, you mentioned your podcast, which is one of my favorite. It is a fantastic podcast. Where did that begin, and what has that meant to you while doing it?
So the podcast began when I talked about live streams. I used to go live on Sunday nights way back when, and it started as me going live by myself on Sunday nights, kind of like getting ready for the school week. And the live stream was a new feature on Instagram, I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And I loved it. I had done it for the photography stuff before. And then I started having friends join me on the live stream, teachers that I had just connected with through social media. And I had such a good time because I started to realize, like, look at all this stuff I'm learning. I didn't know about this teacher through the photos or through the stories. And now I'm getting to actually have a conversation with them. And so that is where the podcast came from, because I was like, every time we ended the live stream, I was like, it's not enough. Like, I have all of these questions I wish I had asked them and that people are asking that I would love to talk about. And so the podcast was this space where we could actually dive deeper with teachers and just pick their brains. And so to me, what it's meant, every time I just celebrated 100,000 listens, and I was really reflecting back on all the people that have shared. And every time I have a guest, like I was just talking about, I remember Michelle Foray coming on. There's the time we talk before the podcast begins and afterwards as we're discussing, wrapping up, that's off the air. And it's so interesting to me because I always ask them, like tips on, okay, tell me about YouTube, or how did you get started with this? And they always give me amazing advice. And then they also inspire me because I look at these other people and I'm like, holy cow, like, look at the amazing things that they're doing. And it just pushes me to share more, to do more. And I just love having like that big, I feel like I get to know people on a deeper level. So now when I have somebody on the podcast and I meet them in real life at a conference, I actually feel like I know who they are. We're not just like surface level, we're a little bit deeper. And that just to me has been amazing, those connections that I've made with people through that.
And I can completely resonate with everything that you said and back it up, because that's exactly why I've been keep doing this one, is just because those connections and those learning the stories are just incredible. And so what is the name of your podcast and where can people find it?
It's A Class of Their Own. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify. It's on Google Play and Alexa for any pod.
There we go. Well, Ty, the one question I always love to end every conversation on is, I believe as people, there are things we hold really close to our hearts and who we are and what we believe. And so if there was people listening or watching today and they were to walk away with one thing, what would your one thing be?
I think that the biggest thing that you do in your classroom is make sure that you're building community. Make sure that you as a teacher set an example for what you believe and what you want your students to believe, and make sure it's known what you believe. Have those difficult conversations. Right now, our country's having a lot of difficult conversations that a lot of people had not been having in the past. And we've got to stand up as teachers, and we have to say things like Black Lives Matter. We have to say that we're allies for the LGBT. We have to say and put a name on these things and stop expecting that people just think that you believe that. They actually need to know that you believe that. And our students need to feel that protective space. And we've got to be examples as teachers, because if we're not doing that, we're not educating the future properly.
Yeah, I love that. And that is the perfect way to end this. Well, Ty, I have just been a fan of yours for a while, and I was super excited to get to chat with you today. So thank you for coming and sharing a few minutes with me for Tell Your Story.
Thanks so much for having me. I had an absolute blast.
And thank you everybody for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you get it, it's there. I hope today's conversation with Ty has encouraged you to get out there and tell your story, because every story matters.